And what we're going to be talking about is building an actionable DEIB plan on a budget. Now, budget is one of those terms that are very, very flexible depending on what budget you have and how large your organization is. So we're going to keep that very flexible throughout the conversation. And how we're going to address it today, we're going to start with the what and how of building a DEIB plan itself, because no matter how good your ideas, no matter how you're able to afford them or fit them into a schedule, if you don't have a strong plan, it's going to be very difficult to turn that plan into action and into results. So we're going to start with that and go through a step-by-step of turning these intentions into actionable strategies and having a roadmap for execution. Once we finish that part of the conversation, which will be the first part of this hour, we're then going to transition into the options or opportunities themselves and go through an introduction of all the different areas that DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging can be driven, can be impacted throughout the organization. And in each one, we're going to go through some rapid fire actionable ideas, some options that you can bring to the table when you start building out your plans throughout the range of budgets that you might be working with. And because we're going to be covering so much in so little time, it's going to be a lot of introductory concepts rather than details and depth. So we are here to help. As Gabe had said at the very beginning, if you have any questions, follow-up conversations, if you just want to have a chat to explore some of the concepts, please, please, please do not hesitate to contact us. You've got the email, you've got my calendar that you can schedule some time if you want to have a chat. It's all in the chat. We're also going to be sharing it again at the end. So,
and Melissa, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm going to reclaim host because without that, I cannot send that chat out. So just give me a moment, everyone, before Melissa continues with the discussion over here. And
Gabe is trying to keep me honest.
I'm trying to keep you honest. And here is the chat message. Should go out to everyone. There we go. Okay, you can continue, Melissa. Thanks.
Okay. So let's dive in. Hopefully you're all seeing the chat now. Let's dive into first, building a DEIB program. So before you start populating all the different things you want to do throughout the course of 2023 or whatever your fiscal year is, you need to have a concept of the program itself and building something that is going to lead you to success. And to do that, let's do a step-by-step. And it all starts with a budget. So the very first step as you start building your DEI plan for the next fiscal or calendar year is to know your budget. That budget has to include both your money, the financials, as well as your time, those resources that are going to be involved within whatever those programs are that you're trying to execute from your diversity initiatives. When you're setting that budget, when you're putting that first step in place for forming your program, make sure it's realistic. Right. So a lot of you might be dealing with borrowed resources, those people who are volunteering to be part of programs that are getting involved in activities beyond their day job. Be realistic with how much time that really is going to translate to for your programs, or you're going to end up creating something that you can't reach. The budget will be too high. So be honest, be realistic, also be specific with what resources you have, which ones are dedicated, which ones are borrowed, which resources are dedicated, or which money is dedicated. And if you fall into one of these common buckets, that whole, but no, we don't have a budget yet. Or first we define what we want to do, and then we'll figure out the money. Or, don't worry about it, we'll find the money. So if any of that sounds familiar, how has that worked for you in the past? Right, so often when you don't start with a budget, you end up not having a program. That money never materializes. It doesn't materialize when you need it. It doesn't materialize to the amount you planned for. And you end up having a program that fizzles before it really gets off the ground. So having a budget really, really matters. So if you are in a position where you do not have one or do not have one yet, it is time to create one. So here's some steps. You want to start with some sort of budget. So start with looking at, well, what did you get before? What was the past spend? What was the past resources for this type of program or programs that are similar? If this is your first time building a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging program, look at other internal programs in the operations, in the logistics, in the employee retention, any of those areas. You look at that money and set, our budget will roughly be around this. Then define a high and a low. What happens if you get more than what you were expecting? What happens if you get a lot less than what you were expecting? Because budgets can fall all over the place, especially when we're in times of less certainty like we are right now. So that way, when you're starting with your plan, you have a likely budget or an estimated budget, and then you also have what happens on either end. What happens if you get more? What happens if you get less? Use that as the beginning and that first step. Then that will let you go to step 2, which is identify the return. This is an organization, right? The organizations that you're working for, that you're planning these programs, they are businesses, they have operations, whether they are for profit, whether they're nonprofit. At the end of the day, you need to deliver. That is every single dollar. Everything spend you have has to have a return. So with a budget, with a spend, you need to have that return. What is that return that you're going to get for the program? To make this super powerful so that you get the money you need to run your program, lock that return to the goals and metrics of your organization. This is not about driving diversity for diversity's sake. This is not about equity for equity's sake. This is in order to help your organization meet the goals using the measurements they use. So how are you going to measure, to monitor, and to ensure impact that you are affecting the organizational goals? And if you're wondering, how do I know if these are the goals that matter? If this is the actual goal I should be measuring to, or if this doesn't matter? There is a trick for that. As you're thinking about the goals that you're going to use to articulate the return on this investment, follow the money. Right? Pretty catchy. That means, where is the money going in your organization? Because that is what matters. So think about things like your compensation and bonus programs. Any type of compensation or bonus program is designed to get people to do what the highest priorities are in the organization to get success for the organization. So how you monetize that, who gets their bonuses at what percentage, is directly impacted by what matters for the organization. So the executives, the management team, single contributors, what are they incentivized to do in their own compensation will tell you where the real goals are for the organization. That is what you want to align to. Similarly, funded programs, where's the money going? What investments is the organization making internally? Because that's what matters. It's not what we say. It's not what's in our PR. It's where our dollars are going, where our money is going. Same thing from a budget perspective. Look at where those budgets are being allocated. That's what's showing you the priorities. So look at those goals that are generating that interest, that are getting that investment. And those are the goals. Those are the measurements you want to align to. How is your program going to impact the revenue, the profit, the cost, the liability, the mission, whatever it is those goals are? Once you have your budget, you have the return you need to get for that budget, that investment. Now you can talk about the options. What are the things you can do, the actions you can take to get that return? And that's going to be what we're going to talk about for the whole second part of this conversation. So let's hold on to that one for a moment and keep going on the next step. So we go through a bunch of options, all the different things we can do. But there's usually quite a bit more that we can do than what we can afford to do. So that forces us to go into that evaluate and prioritization step. So of all the things that are possible to get that return for that budget, what are the things we're actually going to do that are going to have the most impact, that are the highest priority for our organization? There are some ways you can do this quickly. This doesn't have to be a very lengthy, arduous process. So some rapid prioritization techniques as you think about all the different options across your department, across the organization that can all drive diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. To prioritize them, go through a few things. One, embrace the ish. When you're thinking about prioritization, when you're trying to think about things like how much is this going to cost, how much time is it going to take, it's not about accuracy at this stage. It's about getting it close enough that you know how big the program is, the ish. In fact, if you put a simple scale, high, medium, low, large, middle, small, that will help organize things. If you need to go into more detail because you just have a lot that fall into those buckets and it's too much, you can go up to a 5 scale where you have maybe really little, sort of little, medium, kind of big, really big, but don't go more than a 5 scale because then you start getting into way too much work in order to get those differentiations. So ideally 3 to 5, not any more than that. When you're building that out, and I'll show you an example in a second, also take advantage of using visual documentation. Humans are very visual by nature, at least the majority of us are. So the more we're able to turn data into visualizations, the faster we're going to be able to absorb and analyze information and come to conclusions. So think about how you want to represent those priorities in a visual way. And again, I'll show you this in a moment, in order to progress the conversation, get everyone on board quickly in terms of where the priorities and the highest impact are. And then finally, when you do the scoping piece of the prioritization, don't forget that time and resources are part of the scope. It is not just how much money, but it's how much time, how much resources that you have to put in order to get to the successful outcome. Because otherwise, we might have enough money, but we don't have enough bandwidth in order to actually execute on that priority, on that option. So a visualization can look something like this. Super, super simple, where you have the options in some sort of table-like format, and then you just use high, medium, low in order to evaluate what the return is, right? What that budget or the cost is of that effort. Is it clear or measurable? Is it compelling? Is it something that the organization wants to do? One quick note here, as you're doing these visualizations, color is often a really good way to represent something. We tend to have our eyes drawn to one color at a time, so we can see a bunch of green or we can see a bunch of yellow or red. We also have standard understandings, usually green good, red bad. However, we might not all be in a situation where we can see the different colors, whether it is the most common form of colorblind, red, green, or maybe we have a printer that does not have color ink in it, or we have a monitor that does some wonky stuff with color. So we might not all be in that situation to see the colors intended. Super simple fix to this is also use iconology or shading or something else. So even in the grayscale, you are still seeing those visual indicators. Like on this example, the arrow direction changes. Quick way to have a more inclusive visualization. Another thing you want to do, because we're in that rapid fire type of situation, you want to do this fast, is don't do any more work than you have to. So for example, if you see that there's no return for an idea, it's a great idea, but it's not aligned to any of the goals that are getting money, that are getting funded from your organization, you don't need to continue doing the analysis. Just stop. If the budget is too high and there's just no way you can afford it in this year, stop. So when you eliminate all of those things that you know you can't do from early parts of the analysis, then you're not wasting your time with the later parts of the analysis to make sure that it's aligned to what you need to do for your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals. For the few that remain, when you remove all the ones that are not aligned, not good ideas for your organization, at least not in this next year, then you can do a little bit more. You can look at those resources. What are the resource requirements by name or by team? So that way you can manage how many resources are available at what time. Know who your stakeholders are. Where are you getting that money from? Where are you getting permission? Who needs to be involved? Beneficiaries. This one is often overlooked, but highly, highly powerful. If you know who's the beneficiary, the one who's benefiting from that effort, you can manage to that too. And I'll show you that in a second. And then any dependencies. So if you have these programs that are dependent on the completion of other programs or availability of certain funding or whatever it is, you've got all of that mapped out. Because once you have this at least a high level, you can then organize it onto a roadmap. Back to that, visualization is key because humans are very good at absorbing a lot of information visually versus in words or in numbers. If you do something like this on a roadmap, you can use things like size for the amount of effort, for the cost of the effort. The bigger the thing, the more expensive it's going to be from a resource or a budget perspective. Shape for something like this could be something like who's involved, which resources. So that way, if you look at this one, the oval shape, if that represents my design team, I know that that second little bucket, whether that second month is really heavy on the design side, maybe I need to move things around because that's a lot of oval in one space. So I can very visually quickly see that and rearrange to make sure that I have the resources necessary to do the tasks. And then time is usually on the length side. But what we've also done in this example is do lanes for the beneficiaries. That's the different purple shades behind you. Think about it this way. If you have all this effort that you're spending to drive diversity, and it's amazing programs for entry-level positions and career development for entry-level positions, and it's phenomenal, but you're doing over and over again, entry-level, 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 then what happens to the rest of the community? Because here they're spending all this effort on things that don't directly affect them month over month over month, they might start losing interest. But if you swing those beneficiaries, if you balance those, so sometimes it's the entry level, sometimes we're talking about management skills and team development, sometimes it's our future workforce. And so you spread out the beneficiaries of these programs, you're going to keep that involvement higher because people will know even if it's not my turn now, it will be my turn. Once you have that concept of that priority, you've gone through everything, you know how it's all going to fit to a budget or to multiple budgets, depending on the high-low, then it is time to present. Because very few of us have the opportunity where we get to set our entire programs without anyone else's involvement or approvals or funding, anything else. So we kind of have to sell it. And even if we do have control of the budget of what things we're going to do, it is my choice and I say go, we still need to get people to actually follow along with it and engage and not be a hindrance or a barrier. So we still have to sell the idea. So in this case, think about that presentation, that communication step for your plan. It is absolutely vital. And when you're doing that, know thy audience. Are you talking to the group that you need to convince to fund it? Are you talking to the group that you know you need to convince to get involved with it? Are you trying to get volunteers? Are you trying to get people who already have this as their job excited to move forward? What is the purpose? Because you can tailor that message to the audience and to what their needs and interests and fears are. You want to keep it as simple as possible, as visual as possible. That will optimize the absorption of all your messages of this grand plan that you're creating. If you are talking to decision makers, there are also some great tips that you can learn that we can use from the sales side of the organization. A lot of sales teams will use this, which is the options and presumptive close. So these are some of my personal favorites. Presumptive close means that you don't give no as an option. Would you like from column A, column B, or column C? There is no, do you not want this? So doing that with options gives that freedom to select, to have choice as the decision makers, but is also giving that subtle path forward where saying no or talking in circles of what should we do is not there. Options keep people focused and keep people moving forward. Presumptive close takes off that conversation of no. They will have to inject in a no rather than I think we should go with option A, even though it's not ideal, it's cheaper. That's still moving forward. Okay, so we just very, very quickly talked about building a DEIB program. So the concepts around building a program, and that was a lot that we covered. So before we jump into the options themselves, which is going to be a rapid fire, these are different things you can do. Don't forget what we talked about at the beginning, and I'm going to bring it up again at the end. You are absolutely welcome, and we highly encourage if you want to talk about any of these topics, either what we just talked about in 10 minutes, which usually takes a few hours, or the ideas that we're about to dive into, do not hesitate. Go ahead and contact us. Ask any of the questions that you have, or if you have requests for more detail, or you just want to have a friendly conversation or explore opportunities to partner with us, we are here to help. Okay, so let's jump into the options. We just went through a very rapid, here's the way that you can build a plan, but now we've got to populate it. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, there are a ton of different options. So we organize them across which areas they impact within the business. So we're going to start with talent attraction and talent acquisition, move into employee engagement and culture, pay and compensation, talent management and career progression, the future workforce, and then end with philanthropy. There's going to be some ideas, just sample ideas in each of these areas. There's a lot more where this comes from, and there's a lot more depth with each of these. We're just going to rapid fire give some examples. Let's start with talent attraction and talent acquisition. So in the topic of sourcing, the subtopic of sourcing underneath talent attraction and talent acquisition, there's the idea of refining your searches. This, from a scoping perspective, a budget perspective, is typically sort of in the middle range. It's not too big, it's not too small. You can always change your scope based on, or change that size based on that scope. So if you focus in on 1 or 2 searches or 1 or 2 roles versus everything, you can make that bigger or smaller so it can fit your budget if this is a direction you want to go in. Refining searches, what this means is looking at those passive searches that you do to find those candidates you're going to reach out to. Start, if you haven't already, by documenting the search methods. What is it you do? Where do you go? What search terms do you use? What is your Boolean equation that you're using, or those keywords or those titles or whatever you're doing to find that group that you're then going to target for an outreach? Once you have it documented, you can start evaluating it and find places where you can potentially improve. For example, if you're using titles, are there other titles you can use to be more inclusive of a wider audience, keeping in mind that women and people of color tend to have less access to promotions than their male equivalents. So if you're using VP title, you're cutting out a large portion of the population that might otherwise be perfectly well skilled, if not perfect for those positions. So is there things that you can do to change that keyword to include more people? Also looking at tangential industries. For example, so if you're looking at terms that are very specific to that role in your industry, are there tangential industries with similar roles that might use different terminology? And if you include that or create a new search for that, are you going to increase your potential candidate pool? The goal is to increase the quantity, increase the representation without decreasing the quality. So you might have some ideas, maybe try this, maybe try that. The next step is to test and validate. If you use this search term, what does the results look like? If you go to this source versus that source, watch what happens. Look at the quality and the representation of those candidates. And when you find ones that work, where you're bringing in the quality that you're looking for, you're increasing the size of that candidate pool, you're increasing the representation that you expect to see for those roles, the last step is to codify. You want to make sure that that wisdom does not stay with those individuals who did this work. Spread it out, train others, put it as part of the guidelines for any sourcing steps that you might have for your teams. Make it part of your process so that it becomes a wisdom that becomes part of the process itself. It becomes systemic. Another idea in the topic of attraction underneath that talent attraction, talent acquisition. This is another middle of the pack in terms of cost, but doing persona-based reviews. So persona-based review is by going through the process, the entire candidate experience from the point of view of your candidates. However, it's not just one point of view. Think about the various variations of who your candidates are, these personas that you're trying to attract and engage within your programs, and make sure that from their perspective, from their eyes, it is a positive, engaging, and inclusive experience. For example, how does your on-site experience, if you have one, how is that going to be for somebody who's in a wheelchair or for somebody who's blind? This is best done if you have a diverse team that represents the candidate base you are attracting and engaging. That way you've got those point of view firsthand from multiple people in terms of what that experience perception will be. But at the very least, by creating these personas, you're asking the questions of what is this experience going to be like if I was, or for candidates who are, and looking at it from multiple points of view. On the screening side, another one that's in the middle is reviewing the requirements. This one can be all over the map. You can make it super small if you don't have a large budget by concentrating on specific roles or those maybe the high volume jobs. You can make it super large if you've got larger budgets by looking at all of your positions, but doing a requirements review. This is all about evaluating requirements to maximize the equity and the impact. This is not lowering the bar. This is changing the rules of the game so more can participate. You do this by asking why. Why is this a requirement? What are we trying to ensure to make sure these candidates are viable and worth our time and energy and theirs to apply and continue to go through the screening process? A common example that can fall under this evaluation is an education requirement. So it's pretty common, must have a 4-year degree in XYZ or something like that. Asking the why do we need this education? If it's anything other than because that degree is required to practice this form of, or for this job, like a lawyer or a doctor, then there might be other ways to achieve the same goal. So if you're looking for intelligence or problem solving, you're looking for dedication, you're looking for the ability to finish a hard task, well, what are other ways that you can use or other requirements that you can use to get to the same why? And that can increase your candidate pool by expanding, like, for example, in this case, military service. So going through and asking the why of your requirements and seeing if there's other ways that you can achieve the same thing. Under interviewing, create an answer key. This is another option, another action that can make a profound difference in the equity of your candidate experience and of your hiring process. So if we go about asking questions to our candidates and we don't already have the answers in our heads, what's good, what's bad, we don't already have it documented what we're expecting and why, then what will end up happening is we will interpret the answers that the candidates give more likely than not based on the answers we might give, right? If you answered the same way I answered, then your answer must be correct. Therefore, it's a good answer and this is a good experience. If you answer completely different than the way I would have answered, then I might not be comfortable. This is not quite the way we do things over here, and your answer will rank lower, and that candidate might not make it past that screening. But that is not necessarily the right answers or the wrong answers. They're the answer preferences or the comfort level of answers. So just the act of pre-answering and creating an answer key for the questions and engagement from the interview process, you're going to create more equity and give candidates from varying backgrounds and approaches a better opportunity to compete fairly. Because I am not evaluating as the interviewer based on how I would answer a question. I'm evaluating as the interviewer based on what we need the answers to be to prove that these candidates are going to be a strong fit for the position. From an experience standpoint with the talent attraction and talent acquisition, share the process. This one is small. It is a small investment with a large impact. So for those of you who are working with small budgets, something like this could be a great option. All you have to do is articulate, document, and communicate the full process so that candidates know what to expect. This includes all your steps. This includes the general timing. You'll hear from us roughly X number of days after you do this step, after you do that step. It includes the logistics, where to show up for on-sites, where to park, things like that. It basically allows people to have a comfort level with what's about to happen. Because otherwise, from an equity perspective, those that have done a lot of interviews or gone through this process before are going to have more knowledge than those who don't, which means they might have less anxiety than those who don't, because they know what to expect, they know what's going to happen. So just by allowing everyone to have that level of I understand what's going to happen next will decrease that anxiety, create a much better candidate experience, which can ultimately lead to more people saying, yes, I want this job when you give them the offer. So these are just some of the examples over in talent attraction and talent acquisition. Moving over, I told you this was going to be super fast. Moving over to employee engagement and culture, some ideas to populate your DEIB plans in this arena. Starting with culture, training. I know that's one of those where it seems to be one of those where you should just go without saying, and yet we need to say it. training specifically around engagement or engaging with each other. This might be a shock, but we are not born with the skill of getting along. Some of us got really good at it, whether it's we have more of a natural inclination or something's happened within our past, within our path to where we are today, our journey that made us good at it, others not so much. So any type of conflict resolution or managing with tension, or even just having a disagreement on how to solve a problem that the team is facing can create undue tension if the team is not trained on how to engage with each other. So having short practical trainings to help the team communicate, to help the team coalesce around problems, to deal with any issues that arise, to give them a voice, will create a much more safe, inclusive, and welcoming environment. Think about any type of training that will allow it to be short, practical. You want to give your employees something to practice. Just because they know a skill exists doesn't mean they have one. And filling it with tips that they can use right away will help even more, because then you're going to see them start to at least show that effort, that they want to interact, that they want to get to a better conclusion. And that's also worth a lot when it comes to the culture. So things like the yes and, which is an improv technique to keep a conversation going rather than saying no and shutting it down, will help these teams continue to progress and be productive. So this could be somewhere in the middle from a scoping perspective, but again, it all depends on if you want to do a lot, if you want to try with one or one group and move from there, you can get it into a smaller range for smaller budgets. Another thing, it's middle of the road, depending on what your benefits provider and what you already have in infrastructure, but can make a huge impact from a culture perspective, is having an anonymous hotline. So for any of those employee questions, for anything that is uncomfortable for the employees to talk about, this can be anything from conflict resolution to they saw a microaggression and they don't know what to do, or something inappropriate or worse, or questions about benefits like, what's your parental leave? Because I just found out we're having a baby and I'm not ready to tell anybody yet. Having a place to go where they can ask their questions, where they can get their help anonymously, will allow for things to get out in the open and addressed very quickly and not fester, not create problems, not create these invisible things where you end up having people leaving or getting really agitated, or a issue becoming a failure point and a major problem. So it can help a lot, but they need safe places to go to get these questions answered in order to get that to progress. So anonymous hotline. A small thing for those with smaller budgets or are looking to do a lot more with the budget that they have is a review. So part of culture and engagement is your communication, how you're engaging with your employees and communicating critical information. So consider having a diverse group of individuals. This is diverse by not just demographic standpoint, but also where they are in the organization, their rank, their role, their location. Be part of a review team for critical corporate messages or organizational messages, because not everyone's going to perceive the message the same way. And to just have a review to make sure that the intent and the perception are aligned, or you have multiple ways of communicating the same critical message to make sure everybody across your employee base is able to get it, can make a huge difference in the absorption rate of that message. For example, if you have an all hands and somebody on the team goes, yeah, but that's 3 a.m. for our group in India, can we maybe do that twice? That could be big. And it's a real small difference. It's just those critical messages to focus on at least first, and finding a team that can review it and give you feedback. And then from accommodations, back into that middle range from a scope perspective. Reasonable accommodations has a stigma. It has a taboo that's associated with it. It's unfortunate, but for a lot of individuals, a lot of organizations, it's still very much in place. So one way to increase that sense of belonging, that sense of inclusion around a topic that can be highly stigmatized as reasonable accommodation, and talking about disabilities and things that people might need in the moment, is to publish a wide range of accommodations and employee offerings. So instead of waiting for employees to come to you as an organization, as a manager, to ask for something, advertise all the things that you already do so that they can start going through that process of seeing, is there something for them in that moment, in that time of need that you already provide? So spending that time to put together that communication, that publication, whether it's on a website or an internal message board or however you want to do it, or share site, that time will not only benefit those individuals who need accommodations and are not comfortable asking or feel very anxious about asking, it will also be a really strong show, not tell from a diversity standpoint within itself. So if you're an organization that prides themselves on being an inclusive and diverse organization that creates welcoming and equitable environments, rather than saying it, this shows it, this proves it, because you're showcasing the wide range of employees that you enable to thrive, that you understand as an organization. So this becomes also an employer engagement tool. This becomes a recruiting tool. This becomes a loyalty and a retention tool. And then one little small one to end this one out, around the holidays, like now, if you do give gifts, if you're an organization that provides gifts that are non-monetary, not cash, not stock, but actual gifts, consider having options where employees can choose which gifts they get, rather than having it just a blanket single gift that you give out. I'll give you a very common example. If anyone has ever been in the situation where they get a wine or champagne at the end of the year, the whole team gets bottles of wine as a thank you gift for this wonderful year and all the service, which is awesome unless you don't drink for whatever medical, personal, religious reason. And then you've just been handed a reminder that you do not belong with everybody else. Or if there are gifts that are gendered, all the women get this and all the men get that, and isn't this great, except if that's not at all in your interest realm or represent who you identify as, in which case it is not a pleasant experience. These things happen. So to make a more inclusive and engaging environment when it comes to gifts, all you have to do is provide options. Here are all the different gifts that we have. Some organizations will even provide opportunity to donate. So making a donation on behalf of and giving a small variety of options for where someone would like that donation to go. So then the gifts are highly personalized and they are much more around, I want to give you something you will value, rather than checking the box of providing a gift. Pay and compensation, a few ideas around this. And remember, we're just at tip of the iceberg here. First one, very big one, no matter how you slice it, is pay bands. If you don't have them already and you're on that track of doing pay equity or equity within the pay, you want to have pay bands. These are the rules that tell you of this rank, of this role, this is the band of compensation. So nobody is an outlier in one direction or another, and you've got that equity. You can also make sure you deal with locations, for example, or disciplines. So that could be within the bands themselves. In this location, for this rank, for this role, this is the band, or can be in documented exceptions. This is the band, except if you live in this, this, and this very expensive city, in which case we've adjusted it to this band. So whatever it is, it must be documented. You do not want those bands to be too wide, or else you're just leaving room for back to that pay inequity. This can be a large undertaking if you don't have them, because usually along with bands comes correction. Once you have bands, you need to use them. That includes with your existing employees. So make sure if this is something you're going to take on, that you have the time and the budget to do all those corrections. You can do it one at a time and focus in one region or one discipline and roll it out over time. It's better than not doing anything if you don't have bands yet. Another thing also could be on the large scale, more because it requires training than it requires money. And that is the frequent check-ins. A lot of pay, a lot of comp is tied into performance. And so if you stick to just those annual reviews, if you stick to just those once in a quarter, once every other quarter conversations, it's not enough to actually make adjustments. It becomes more of a policing effort than of a investment effort. And you want these to be investment efforts. You want your employees to feel as though every part of this conversation is in the realm of, I'm going to get you to that highest potential, not I'm going to make sure you dot every I or not give you the highest potential. So that frequent check-in to talk about where you are now in that performance, those objectives, any adjustments that need to be made will all benefit. It will all not only benefit in getting to the results everybody wants, right? Meeting all those goals, but it will also give that reinforced expectation from the employee perspective that you care about me and my success and my compensation. So it becomes something that's really strong from not just an equity standpoint, but also a retention standpoint. Coming down more to the middle of the range, the rule transparency is huge. So if you're going to have, or you do have any type of monetary offerings, award systems, reward systems, prizes, anything like that, whether it's in a single department like sales or whether it's across an organization, make sure that those monetary offerings are well documented and well communicated. So people understand the criteria, they understand the application process, how they can compete for it and how they can win. Because the last thing you want is it to look like a popularity contest where people are just paying out their friends, the same people over and over again, and others don't even realize there's a competition happening. And then another one, this is also part of on the large end of things, especially if you have larger benefit offerings, but it can be hugely impactful. So something to think about if you have a larger budget is the benefit equity audit. So while we have benefits that are available to everyone, that doesn't mean the benefits are worth the same to everyone. So using that same persona concept, or maybe the diversity team concept, where you bring people in to see that from others' point of view, review your benefits and see, are they catering to the wide spectrum of employees that you have or that you intend to have? Because if not, there might be some adjustments that need to be made in order to make sure the benefits are of value across your employee base. A very quick technique to see if this could be an issue or not is look at who's using your benefits. If you notice a trend where there is a conspicuously missing demographic or multiple demographics that just aren't taking advantage of the benefits versus others, you might have a problem, and it's worth taking a look at. Rolling into talent management and career progression. Here we go. So we have objective reviews from a performance standpoint, very similar to what we just talked about, where if you have your reviews often tied to monetary gain or opportunities for promotions in the future, we need to understand what it is to get a good review. So that means to establish and communicate the objective performance criteria and measurements before the review process. Otherwise, it can lean very subjective very quickly, and that can be problematic. This is a large effort from a scoping perspective because it requires training. Managers are not born with this capability, nor do we get it from the moment we become a people manager. We must be trained on how to do objective reviews and establishing objectives that we can then track against in a way that's clear and allows our employees to follow them and progress. You want to pair this up with frequent check-ins because, again, the goal is to meet and exceed. The goal is not to catch people not getting the job done so we can underpay them. From a career step path standpoint, a little bit smaller, is making sure that the opportunity selection is equitable. What this means is think about how people are selected to be promoted, what they've done to stand out against their peers, to be that top of the list person that gets tapped on the shoulder to get that promotion, to do that next role. Often, it's not just being really good at the job at hand. There's usually a pattern of extras, whether they get a lot more face time in front of the executives or the skip levels because of what the projects they're working on, what projects they're working on, and what projects they're running, what opportunities, speaking engagements or opportunities to make waves that get noticed, that gets them bubbled to the top as the top of the pack, and then they can get that promotion. Challenge with this is not all of those opportunities are equitable. Some people don't even realize they're there or don't have an opportunity to be selected for them because they're not one of the favorites that gets to go into that executive meeting over and over again. And in some cases, they have no idea that it's valuable to take on these extras in their job because they're too busy being really good at their day job, and they don't consider those extras important. They just don't know. So when you're thinking about the critical opportunities for selection and eventually to allow people to separate from the pack and get promoted, communicate what it is, why it matters, when it's going to happen, how can you put your name in for that opportunity, become engaged so that now at least you have a level playing field and people understand this is what's actually at stake, this is what this opportunity actually means, rather than assuming everyone knows because they don't. And that's a big equity piece. It's usually in the middle. It depends on how much you're choosing. If you're doing it on a team basis with smaller opportunities, if these are big organizational opportunities, but in any sense, creating this expectation of documentation, of communication, of making sure it's very clear, this is what this thing is, this is why it matters, this is why you should consider raising your hand for it. On the larger scale, path definition is another one. Define and communicate the career paths. Not everyone is going to know that there is a path forward or what those path forwards are. So you think about people who are coming into a professional environment, maybe for the first time, it's their first job, or they might be first generation in this type of professional environment. So they do not have family members. They might not have friends who are telling them, hey, this is a stepping stone to that. And if you do this, then you can get over to there. They might not even know what kind of financial value it would be to progress up, whether it's through management or going into different areas within the organization. So another big equalizer and something that's going to increase retention and loyalty is simply talking about what your career paths are, from the entry level into management, what the common ones are, what skills, what steps you need to take as an employee, so that now everyone understands the game, rather than some people playing it really well and other people not having any idea it exists and kind of get stuck, not realizing there's other opportunities. And then when done right, another big impact, but unfortunately more on the large side of the scope, is mentorship. So establishing mentors that will help the community progress, help your employees progress. So mentors are super, super powerful. They give you access from a networking perspective into the upper echelons of organizations. They give you access to information from a lot of experience that other employees have not had. They can help when it comes to developing skills, navigating challenges, and navigating the careers. But not everyone knows to look for them or how to choose good ones. So building a mentor program can make a big difference in connecting people with that type of information, with that type of access within the organization. I'm a big fan of multiple mentors, which means don't put all the burden on one person. So you have different mentors for different skills, for different goals, and then you stagger them. So you might have one for 6 months, and then that last 3 months, another one starts and you transition to another one. That also gives you an opportunity to create a lot of diversity within your mentor program, so that your next generation of employees who are engaged on the other side or being mentored are seeing a wide range of what it is to be a mentor, what wisdom is, what power is, what success is, starts taking a lot of different forms when they have a diversity within the mentors that they personally engage with over time. Moving into future workforce, some ideas here. Future workforce is investing in the people who are going to be engaging with us tomorrow, not today. So they're the ones that are going to become our employees in the future. A large one, but a really interesting one, fellowships. So we have internships, which are usually designed for people going through school, coming out maybe the last couple of years of their college education, and then they funnel into the organization. Fellowships is very, very similar, except that it is designed for existing professionals looking to up-level or change direction, mid-career shifting, breaking through some glass doors, barriers, ceilings, whatever you want to call them, in order to progress their careers where they have gotten stuck. They must be paid. These are professionals, which means they already have a lot of bills to pay. So having an internship that or a fellowship that engages with them in a way that they can break through those barriers and get access to the next levels of their careers and the generational wealth that comes with up-leveling.
Hey, Melissa, 7-minute warning for you.
I got it. Thank you. Right. Scholarship support is another one. This one can be very small. So I know a lot of organizations get a little bit hesitant when it comes to scholarships because education is very expensive, but you do not need to pay for an entire scholarship for an entire individual or set of individuals. You don't even need to go through the process of selection. You can find somebody who does that for you. So even searching for an organization that does scholarships and funding them through donation to whatever you can afford, so it can be small, will still make an impact. So look for those organizations that are funding scholarships that are relevant to your roles and what you'd like in your industry, in your location, your communities. And that's a way that you can get engaged in scholarships without taking on a lot of that financial burden. Camp programs, another way to go outreach. This is when you're reaching further into the community a little earlier. So they're not quite ready to start thinking about their job, but they are starting to think about what they're going to do when they grow up. So just engaging the community to give them a sense of what's possible, of getting them excited for futures in your areas, in your professions. Think camp programs and weekend picnics and things. Just make sure that you are timing them for when the families and those children that you are targeting are, or those communities that you're targeting are available, so not during school hours. And external mentors. An extension of the mentor program we just talked about is donating some time. This can be very small, it can be a few hours every quarter, but having people who have that wisdom, that experience to donate some time through schools and associations to provide that advice to the next generation as they're considering what kind of school should they apply for, what kind of summer program should they get involved in to start building up that resume to get into that higher education program or that internship or whatever it is to get into these future jobs. So expanding that concept, even if it's just a few hours, will start making a difference in this next generation of workforce. And then finally, with the last 5 minutes, we will jump into some ideas around philanthropy. Donation. This can be any size. So it can be super small from a scope but perspective. It can be super large. It can be anything in the middle. This is completely up to you. It's all a matter of what you want to donate, how much, and to what. The only thing that really matters here from a donation perspective is who you're choosing. So that's where a lot of that investment comes in, is choosing the right organization, association that is not just aligned with what will make sense for your employer brand, because that's really what this is. It's all about employer branding. It's also going to make sure that you vet them so that that money is doing what you think it's going to do. And then once you build those partnerships, then you scale to whatever makes sense for your organization. Very similar is fundraising. So fundraising, just like donation, except it's not organizational money, it's your employees' money. So it is the way to get the employees, to get your community, professional community involved. When you do something like this, a few things that are super important. One is communicate exactly where that money's going, just like you did the due diligence for the organization. You want to communicate that due diligence for your community, for your employees. Two, you do not want the high pressure. Not everyone is going to be from the same socioeconomic class. You do not want to have a pressure situation where employees have to donate or have to donate a certain amount. So make sure there's anonymous factors to it, that people can give money without having to tell how much or if they did or anything else. So can make sure that's the case. You can also turn that into social events, raffles, games that you play during picnics where you're selling $1 per ticket or whatever it is. So you can make it engaging and fun for the employees, but that will allow them to also participate. Service days are always great in getting the community. It's not only just community development, so you get that employee engagement, but it's also employer brand, getting the employer brand out there into your communities. Just make sure you have options. Not everyone is going to be well suited for Habitat for Humanity Day or Habitat for Humanity efforts, for example. So if you give a small list of different ways that employees can get involved, that takes into account different levels of physical capability, interests, time, that will allow everyone to get engaged in a way that is impactful and safe for them. And then finally, business allocation. This one can be very large, very impactful. This is the concept of thinking about, at least from a percentage of the money that you spend with your vendors and your partners, of who you are funding, of taking the time to select vendors and partners that, let's say, are owned by underrepresented, minority women-owned businesses, for example, to allow that money to go into the future ecosystem or into a continuous ecosystem of organizations that live the DEIB that you are driving that are diverse, equitable, inclusive, and create these welcoming environments. So with your money, you are voting not just in your organization, but also your partnership organizations to push that DEIB effort forward. So a very simple example of something like this is you can keep getting lunch from the same big chain restaurants that you always get, or you can start looking at community businesses and some of the mom and pops that have been created that have these great food in your community and pump money into that community, into those individuals, and create that wealth around you in the community. So probably the fastest I've talked in a webinar in a long time. That was a lot of information to get through. This was just some ideas, basically a table of contents of all this different thing that's possible as you look to your 2023 effort. Remember, as we said before, we are here to help. So we've got a ton of information on all these and more, with ideas, with how to build plans, with how to turn those plans into actions. You can find the content on our blog. We also have a lot of training that goes into a lot of detail with this. And of course, if you'd like to just have a chat, you can send us a message at info@career.place. You can even book a time directly with me. That link was shared through Gabe in the chat. We would be more than happy to have a conversation. So thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And for anyone who would like to stay behind, who have some questions, who want to have a conversation, we're going to be stopping the recording in a second and then opening it up for conversation for a few minutes longer. Thank you all.